It's Monday, Modern Madness, an open tag started by 865 Knives. And today I want to show you a knife that I've been carrying for the last couple of weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks. This is a Benchmade 940. It is from the custom shop. As you can see, it has orange G10 handles. I went with the small pocket clip. And this one has an S90V blade. I went with all black hardware. This thing is just a beautiful knife. What the orange color does for me is provide high visibility. So when I'm working and I have to set the knife down and then pick it back up again, I can see exactly where it is. It stands out clearly. This has been very important to me at work lately. This knife has just been phenomenal. I've carried a Benchmade 940 for a long time. I bought my first one back around 2010, and I still have that knife, and I'll show it to you on the future Monday Modern Madness. But let's take a look at a couple of these specs. You have just about a 3.5-inch blade. It's very close. It's about an eighth, maybe 3 3/8-inch blade. But one thing you'll notice, it's all cutting edge. The blade edge starts where the handle starts. That means you have no lost space. So if you go into an area where there's a 3.5-inch blade law, usually they measure from the handle to the tip of the blade. Now, if you have a choil in here, you're losing that area. And it's subjective to the officer whether or not they want to count that choil area or sharpened edge. Because technically, this is where the knife stops. So this knife makes the most efficient use of its 3.5-inch roughly blade length. More efficient than many other knives. There's very few that are like this. The knife is very slender. It carries great in the pocket because you can get your hand all the way up on there. And that's perfect. It ends up just flush with the end of my hand. Now, one thing a lot of people will say is, well, the knife is too skinny or it's not tall enough. Well, it comes down to how you hold the knife. When you're cutting, you're putting pressure this way into your hand. You don't have to try and get a death grip on it. I just fold my hand over and clamp it. There's space in here. So I just use my fingers to push the knife into my hand. And when you're cutting, you're putting pressure up into the hand. You don't really need this part of your hand squashed up on the knife. So as long as you grip it correctly, it's an extremely comfortable knife to use. It's great in the pinch grip. You know, you can get up and pinch the blade up here and get up by the tip. It's a very useful blade shape. You have a good straight portion and then a little bit of belly. You have a nice thick tip. This tip is very stout. Unlike a lot of other knives that when I use them for actual work, I'm scared of breaking it. It all depends on what you're using your knife for. If you're using a knife solely for slicing, then yes, there are better choices. So is this knife a good slicer or not? People say, oh, these knives are horrible. They don't slice any good at all. Well, that's wrong. This knife is a good slicer. This one's new. I haven't touched the edge back, but what I normally do on these is I lay the edge back to about 14 degrees per side, 28 degrees inclusive. That completely transforms the knife and makes it an excellent slicer. Is it as good as something like a Paramilitary 2 or a Mannix 2? No, it is not. It's not going to be as good of a slicer as a taller, full flat grind. But that said, it still is a good slicer and it'll get the job done without causing any fatigue, and it'll get it done easily. But this knife will do a lot of things that those other knives will not do because they're too fragile, the tips are too weak, and one advantage this has with its slender profile, it fits beautifully in the pocket. This thing disappears. You don't even know you have it on you. You can have a knife with a comfortable handle that's long enough to fit your whole hand, a 3.5-inch usable blade length, or maybe 3 3/8-inch usable blade length. You can have a good stout knife that's big enough to do the jobs that you have without causing fatigue. This is one of the best carries that there is a Benchmade 940 in any of its flavors. I highly recommend them. And those of you that have been watching this channel for a while, You already know that I really like the Cold Steel Recon 1. That has a 4-inch blade. That is one of my favorite carries. And this is right there with it. I carried a green Benchmade 940, one of the green ones that had an S30V blade, for about 5 years. Probably a minimum of 5 days a week. I would rotate and carry a few other knives here and there just for fun, but that was my main knife, and I used it Monday through Friday for my work week. And I just love those knives. Now I'm going to show you a few other knives that I carry. Along with that, I always carry a traditional knife. And the knife I've been carrying for the last month or so is this old-timer 8OT. This is one, I have a couple videos on my channel that I did a restoration on. This knife was in really bad shape. It was severely worn. The scales were very slick. It was almost like you were picking up an object that had been greased up. It was hard to hold on to. Now with the scalloping, with that extra texture, it's a pleasure to use. I also had to regrind the blades to make it usable. So much was sharpened away that they were too thick behind the edge, and the knife also wouldn't close. Now this knife is a pleasure to use, and I've really been enjoying carrying this thing. I also carry a Leatherman P2 on me every day. This one I modified. I put a flat bit driver in it, and then I took one of the long Leatherman bits, one of their double-sided bits, and I cut it down a little bit shorter, and I reground the flat on this side, and I did it as a hollow grind. So now this is an incredibly useful knife. That bit driver completely changes the Leatherman P2. And on this side, I still have the standard tools. Great multi-tool. I also changed the blade on this one, and I have a completely flat blade. I don't like the ones that are half serrated. I like a blade that's completely straight, or a blade that is all serrated if it's a secondary blade on a knife. So some of these multi-tools that have two blades, if one of them is straight and one is serrated, then I'm happy. But don't give me a combo blade. I can't stand those things. And for my light for the last few days has been this Olight Arcfeld. These are pretty nice lights. They're 1300 lumens. They're slim. They carry nice in the pocket with that rectangular form shape, magnetic charger, two-way pocket clip. This one has your light, a laser, and UV. So you have it. That's been my EDC knives and flashlights for the last couple of weeks. We'll see you on the next Monday Modern Madness.